The world began with pressure and warmth, a slick, urgent tumbling into cold, sharp air. For the first few moments there was only shock and the overwhelming scent of damp earth and his mother. His legs, impossibly long and folded like carpenter's rules, trembled as he tried to understand the strange gravity of this new world. This was the slopes of Moel Hebog, one of the slate-grey, heather-clad mountains that stands guard over the Welsh village of Bedgelert. The year was just turning, the April winds still carrying a bite of winter from the higher peaks of Snowdonia, or Eryri as the old tongue called it. His mother, a sturdy Welsh mountain goat with a coat the colour of dried bracken and intelligent amber eyes, began her work. Her tongue was rough, a rasping rhythmic towel that cleaned him, stimulated his breathing, and coated him in the essential lanolin and rain scent of the flock. He was one of 2 kids born that morning, but he was smaller, his bones finer, his first bleats quieter. Later that day, a figure appeared, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who knows the mountain as well as his own home. This was Emyr Jones, a farmer whose family had worked this very tidden, or smallholding, for 2 centuries. Emyr was a man carved from the same stone as the mountains around him, weathered, quiet, with hands thick and calloused from a lifetime of mending slate fences and delivering lambs. He approached the new mother cautiously, his voice a low, soothing murmur. "Well now, Patriarch, you've done well." His gaze fell on the 2 kids. One was already strong, butting its head against its mother's flank, demanding milk. The other, this small kid, was still shaky, observant. Emyr knelt, the damp ground seeping into the knee of his trousers. He ran a gentle, practiced hand over the small goat's back. The kid flinched, but didn't run. "Just a little pipsqueak, aren't you?" Emyr said, more to himself than to the goat. "A little Pip." And so he was named, not in any official ledger, but in the quiet internal catalogue of the farmer who was the steward of his life. Pip's first summer was a symphony of learning. Life was a vertical challenge. His mother taught him not with words, but with action. He learned the art of the impossible leap, the delicate balance on a knife edge of rock, the critical skill of knowing which patch of ground would hold his weight and which would crumble into scree. His hooves, cloven and sharp-edged, with a soft, pliable inner pad, were perfect tools for gripping the ancient Cambrian rock. The world was a map of tastes, the sharp acidic tang of gorse flowers, the bitter medicine of yarrow, the sweet tender shoots of bilberry, and the supreme delicacy of rock-hugging mosses found only in the dampest, most shaded crevices. He learned the social hierarchy of the herd, the subtle language of a lowered head, a flicked ear, a rumbling growl in the chest that warned away a rival from a prime patch of grazing. Emyr was a constant peripheral presence. He wasn't a source of affection in the way a pet owner would be. His care was practical, essential. Pip learned the sound of Emyr's Land Rover rattling up the track from the valley below. He saw him in the distance, a small figure in a waxed jacket, counting heads with binoculars, or mending a section of wall pushed down by the winter storms. Once, Pip got a thorn deeply embedded in his hoof. The pain was sharp, causing him to limp. Emyr noticed. With a patience that seemed infinite, he cornered Pip and his mother against a rock outcropping, his calm presence a strange contrast to Pip's panic. "In da well, bach, easy now, little one." His strong hands held Pip firm, and with a small pair of pliers from his pocket, he expertly removed the thorn. The relief was immediate. There was no treat, no pat on the head. There was only the quiet act of stewardship, and then Emyr moved on, his duty done. Pip understood this relationship in the way an animal does, not as kindness, but as part of the natural order of his world. The man was a feature of the landscape, like the wind or the rain, sometimes harsh, sometimes helpful, but always there. The real test came in Pip's second year. He was an adolescent now, filled with a reckless curiosity that often pushed him to the edges of the herd's territory. He was no longer a pipsqueak, but a nimble, confident young goat with the beginnings of proud, curved horns. It was a day in late October. A heavy mist, a Welsh myin, had descended from the summit of Snowdon and smothered the landscape in a blanket of silent, disorienting grey. The herd wisely stayed low, grazing on a sheltered slope near the old copper mine workings. But Pip, driven by a memory of a particularly delicious patch of saxifrage he'd seen on a higher ledge, broke away. He was only 50 yards from the herd when the world dissolved. The mist was so thick he could no longer see the goat in front of him, let alone the familiar shapes of the rocks. The air was heavy with moisture, muffling all sound except for the drip, drip, drip of water from ferns and the frantic beat of his own heart. He called out, a high, anxious bleat, but the sound was swallowed by the fog. He turned back, expecting to find the herd, but he had become disoriented. Every direction looked the same. Panic began to set in, a cold fear that was different from the sudden fright of a swooping buzzard. This was a deeper, more existential dread, the terror of being alone. He scrambled upwards, thinking the herd must be higher. The ground grew steeper, looser. He heard a noise, a low, guttural rumble. It wasn't an animal. The rocks beneath his hooves shifted, and then the world fell away. A small section of the slope, saturated by days of rain, gave way. It was not a dramatic landslide, but a churning, sickening slide of scree and mud that carried him down, scraping and tumbling for 100 feet. He landed in a heap, bruised and terrified, in a gully he did not recognize. The mist was thinner here, but the rock walls were sheer on 3 sides. He was trapped. Above him, the scar of the rockfall was a fresh, dark wound on the mountainside. The scent of the herd was gone, replaced by the raw smell of upturned earth. For the rest of that day and a long, cold night, Pip was utterly alone. The wind howled through the gully, a mournful, lonely sound. Hunger gnawed at his belly. He was a creature of the flock, his entire existence predicated on the safety of the collective. Without them, he was just a small, vulnerable animal in a vast, indifferent wilderness. He huddled under a rocky overhang as rain began to fall, a cold, persistent drizzle that soaked his coat and chilled him to the bone. Down in the valley, Emyr Jones was doing his evening count. He stood by the stone wall of the paddock, his breath pluming in the damp air, and scanned the herd as they came in for the night. He counted them once, then twice. He knew each of his 64 goats by sight. He didn't need to count, not really. He felt their numbers, and tonight one was missing. "Pip," he muttered, scanning the mist-shrouded slopes of Moel Hebog. A flicker of frustration, quickly replaced by a deep, familiar worry. A lone goat in this weather, on this mountain, was in trouble. The next morning, the mist had lifted, but the sky was a bruised purple. Emyr took no one with him. He took his oldest sheepdog, Fly, a border collie whose intelligence was almost human, and his long ash-wood shepherd's crook. For hours they walked. Emyr's eyes scanned the ground, not for a goat, but for signs. A displaced stone, a snag of coarse white hair on a gorse bush, a set of tracks. He knew the herd's favorite spots, their patterns, their routines. He knew Pip's youthful arrogance. "He'll have gone high," Emyr said to Fly, who seemed to understand completely. They found the site of the rockfall late in the afternoon. Emyr studied the slide, his face grim. He saw the small scuffed tracks leading into it, but none leading out. He looked down into the gully below. It was steep, treacherous. "Stay here, girl," he commanded Fly, and began his descent, using his crook for balance, his boots finding footholds that seemed impossibly small. He moved with the unhurried certainty of his ancestors. Pip heard him before he saw him, a dislodged pebble rattling down the gully wall. Then a voice, cutting through the wind. Not a shout, but a clear, carrying call. "Pip! Hi! Goat!" Pip's head shot up. His ears swiveled, pinpointing the sound. A surge of something, hope, recognition, ran through him. He answered with the strongest bleat he could muster, a raw, desperate cry. A few minutes later, Emyr's form appeared at the top of the gully. He didn't rush. He assessed the situation, then carefully made his way down. He reached Pip and ran a hand over his flank, checking for broken bones. Pip was scraped, thin and shivering, but whole. "Da row," Emyr sighed, a soft Welsh curse of exasperation and relief. "You daft creature, caused a bit of trouble, haven't you?" There was no grand rescue. There was only the slow, arduous climb out of the gully, with Emyr guiding him, clearing a path, his presence a shield against the vastness of the mountain. When they finally reached the top, Fly greeted them with a series of happy low yaps. The walk back to the farm was quiet. Pip trotted weakly beside Emyr, the scent of the man and his dog a profound comfort. When they reached the lower pasture and saw the familiar milling shapes of his herd, a deep, instinctual calm settled over him. He was back. He was safe. Pip was never the same goat again. The ordeal had burned the recklessness out of him. He stayed closer to the heart of the herd, his movements more considered, his eyes more watchful. He had learned the ultimate lesson the mountain had to teach, that survival was not just about strength and agility, but about wisdom and community. Years passed. Emyr Jones grew older, his back a little more stooped, his pace a little slower. And Pip, the little pipsqueak, grew into a magnificent billy goat. His coat was thick, his beard long, and his horns were great sweeping scimitars that showed his age and his standing. He was the dominant male, the patriarch of the flock. His children and his children's children now leaped across the rocks of Moel Hebog. Sometimes, on a clear summer evening, Emyr would sit on the stone bench outside his cottage and look up at the mountain. He'd see the white specks of his goats moving against the deep green and gray. And often he would spot one goat standing on the highest, most dramatic crag, a solitary silhouette against the setting sun. He knew it was Pip. He was no longer just a goat. He was a part of the mountain itself, a living embodiment of its wild and enduring spirit. And Emyr, the quiet farmer in the valley, would allow himself a small, rare smile. His work, and the work of his fathers, was continuing. The life of the mountain and the life of the goat went on.